I had a request to do a video with my feet on for a minute, but I decided to just do the whole video with my feet instead of my face. And that pretty much works considering I've been doing a few lately where I'm just not in the mood to show my face. I'm thinking I'll talk about Madame de Pomapadour for a little while because she's just about my favorite historical figure who worked their way up in a time that was not so friendly to women in power. So, Madame de Pompadour was born Renette Poisson in a bourgeoisie family in 1720, I believe. And she was destined to be the uncrowned Queen of France, the mistress to Louis XV. If you've heard of her, you probably heard her from Doctor Who. She was in season 2 of the new series, I believe. And so she started off as in a bourgeoisie class, and she married into another rich bourgeoisie family, and was next door neighbors to Louis XV at one of his country houses, and that's how she met him for the first time. It was, he was hunting, and although riding with the royal procession during a hunt is reserved only for nobles, she still drove next to him in her flashy carriages with her flashy dresses and caught his eye that way. After a few meetings like this, they went to each other's parties in mask. Louis XV actually went to a lot of bourgeoisie parties in mask, but because he had a very distinctive voice, people could usually tell if it was him or not, especially since he's the only one there with a mask. And she would be brought to the noble royal parties with a mask on, so no one would know that she was the mysterious adulteress that he took a liking to. And so after a while of this, she decided to give him the ultimatum that she would have to have her marriage annulled or they would have to stop seeing her. And a lot of people at court thought that this was really crass of her to give the king an ultimatum, but it actually did it did set forth that he needed to either get serious or drop it so that they could both go back to their regular lives. And so 2 months later, she went through an extensive training with his best friend so that she would learn all of the nuances of court life, which there were hundreds of trivial little rules, like within which proximity to whom can you sit on what kind of seat, and for how long, and the like. Actually, when she arrived, at court to be presented formally to like the royals and like just everyone, there was this moment where she was supposed to take her gloves off to kiss the queen's skirt, and her bracelet snapped off because she took off the glove too shakily, and it scattered across the floor. And even though she was there, her job was to sleep with the king as his mistress, everyone thought it was the most scandalous thing ever, and they pretty much shunned her. Then they started to count the number of sentences she exchanged with the queen. Usually 2 sentences were sufficient, one for her to introduce herself and one for the queen to compliment her on her clothing and dismiss her. But they got up to 11, and it was a big deal because they were actually pretty close friends, even though Madame de Pompadour was hired to sleep with the queen's husband. So she, during her career, she kept gaining a lot of power. People used she was only the mistress for about 5 or 10 years, and so after that, like a lot of other people tried to take the job, men and women. Louis XIII was actually known to be gay, and so a lot of people assumed that Louis XV might. So both men and women were trying to be the mistress, and so if they tried to usurp her power, though, or get a real relationship with him, she always checked that and was able to gain another level of nobility. She entered as a marquis, which is like a duke, and not a duke, it's a marquis, which is like a baron, and she ended up at the level of a duke and was able to sit in the presence of royals, casually at any time. And as a personal note, the king, Louis XV, when he was 15, he was engaged to a 5-year-old princess of Spain, and then because they all thought that he would turn out gay like his great-great-grandfather Louis XIII, he was then quickly engaged to the Polish princess, who was poor and about 7 years older than him. So after she turned 35 and he was still like 28, he had no interest in her, so she sort of took a back seat, and he went through a slew of mistresses before he got to Madame de Pompadour, and then there were a few after her. Madame de Pompadour actually she was misled by some documentation she had found about Louis XIV's mistress, and who had been formally presented at about, I think, 45, and he was 40. So she had assumed that they had a completely platonic relationship, which is why she stepped down from her position after only 5 or 10 years with Louis XV. So after, she stepped down, but they actually did have a relationship. Louis XIV and his mistress, they actually did have a relationship until she was 80 and he was 75, at which time she had confessed to the priests at court, like that twice a day was too much for her, and asked if something was wrong with her, and so yeah, that actually ran in the family. So Louis XV went through more women after her, but she did check them if they did try to gain any real connection with him. There were women who tried to become her. One bourgeoisie girl was sent to court. She was told to undress. She'd never undressed before or dressed herself in her life. She always had servants doing it, so it was so awkward for her. And then the king came in at 2 a.m. after partying and decided he was too tired and sent her home, and it was just really awkward. There were 2 major scandals, which is why she ended up like a duchess at the end instead of just a marquis. After she was the mistress, she actually went on to be one of the chief diplomats during the 7 Years' War with Austria, and is why France allied with Austria after such tedious relations for so long. And although she had nothing to do with Canada and the colonies at that point, she did get blamed for a lot of random stuff that had been happening. There was this one little boy in Paris who went missing, and they think that the child grabbers got him, because at that point they would just take homeless people and people with no job and people who were drunkards or criminals and just ship them off to Quebec, much the same way the British did to Australia later. Don't understand why Quebecers don't have that same sort of cred, but at any rate, she was just blamed for absolutely everything so that people could blame her and still love the king. Which brings me to my next point, is why she, completely unintentionally set up Marie Antoinette for such failure in years to come. She had set the premise that you could hate the mistress, and Marie Antoinette was Louis XV's mistress. There are some speculations that he saw others, but she was officially the mistress, and people hated her. They could hate her so they could keep loving him. And also, she was hated for having all these little houses everywhere, and most of those were built by Madame de Pompadour. They were not, they were already built. They were only run and funded by tax money. They weren't built by the tax money under Louis XVI. And also, they never would have married if the alliances hadn't been patched up and the relationships had improved under the diplomacy of Madame de Pompadour. So, unintentionally, she did set her up for a lot of failure. She died of there was it's a little bit sketchy because it's hard to tell because the medical records weren't so great back then. It's hard to tell, but they say that she drowned, there was water in her lungs and she drowned of it. So she knew she was dying over a very long time. It was very painful. But she did, she died with a lot of dignity. She broke up her property, and like everything was just with grace. And when she finally died, Louis XV was, because she was no longer the mistress, he was not able to grieve publicly for her, and there is absolutely no record of his mourning her loss. And I hope that you enjoyed this and learned something about Madame de Pompadour. She is brilliant and a wonderful historical figure, and it's fascinating to see a woman climb the political ranks in such a way so long ago.